All right. So with that said, just want to welcome you. It's a pleasure to be here today. Really excited to talk about being a writer with you. I'll share a little bit about myself and then we'll dig into the work. So as you can see, my name is Liz Weiermiller and I'm actually joining you from upstate New York. So I live outside of Rochester, which is kind of halfway between Buffalo and Syracuse across the New York State Thruway, if you're at all familiar with that region of the country. And I come to you as a consultant for Center for the Collaborative Classroom, but also as someone who has worked with this program in his school district from the ground up. So about 5 years ago, the school district I was working in needed a writing curriculum. Everyone was kind of doing their own thing with writing, and we needed something that we could have these collegial conversations around. We needed some type of consistent, coherent, resource that we could pull from to utilize for writing instruction. And so we did a bunch of research and we decided to pilot being a writer. And we found that it really was the answer to what we needed. And so that was a year that I worked alongside a kindergarten teacher every day in the classroom, teaching this program alongside of her. And it really was just an awesome learning experience. And I felt as though we really grew as educators as we implemented this program. So as we talk through our work today, you'll notice that there's a lot of best practices incorporated into this instruction, a lot of important facilitation techniques that I never thought about in all my years of teaching. And so that was my role a few years ago as an instructional coach. But prior to that, I taught first grade for many, many years. I was a reading recovery teacher for several years as well. I'm an illiteracy coach. So have a lot of experience with this work. And so I'm really excited to share that with you all today. All right, we still have some friends coming in. So, and then I see a message in the chat. Okay, so Martin City has 4 of us in one room. So that probably makes up the difference of what we're looking for here. So perfect. All right, well, I think everyone's here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. And we are going to talk about how we can launch being a writer. And we're also going to look at it through the lens of that remote learning. So in order to teach this program remotely, we first need to understand what's encompassed in it and how to utilize it. So the first part of our work today is really going to be about understanding being a writer. We're going to dig into the curriculum materials. You're going to see what those lessons look like. You're going to look through the introduction and really gain a deeper understanding of it. And then the last hour today, we're going to spend looking at that through the lens of remote learning. So a few logistical pieces. If you're not familiar with Zoom, we have that mute button in the bottom left-hand corner. And so we'll just ask you to keep your line muted unless you have a question or you want to share a response. And also, if you could have that video on, that really helps me feel as though I'm with you all, and we can kind of have that connection and build this learning community as we work through our session today. You can make sure that your name reflects what it is that you want it to say by utilizing that participant icon. You can click that little arrow and select the more option to change your name if needed. And there's also that little chat that we are going to utilize as we work through our session today. That's really kind of where your voice can be heard and where you can share your thinking, you can share responses. And so what we're gonna do next is just have you have some practice opening that chat and utilizing that feature. So I invite you to open up that chat and just share your name, your school obviously, and your role, just so that we can kind of see who's all in the room and so I can get a good idea of who we're talking to today. All right, good. So you're all in the right place. I see kindergarten, first and second grade. We've got some, looks like instructional coaches perhaps. All right, so you can kind of scroll up and down and see who's represented in our Zoom room today. So thank you for engaging in that. It looks like you're all Zoom pros, so we won't spend too much longer here. So some of the goals that we're going to engage in today is, first, we're going to learn the pedagogy and instructional design of being a writer. It's really unique in that, like I said, it incorporates best practice. It's like best practice packaged into this very user-friendly design, truly intended to be supportive of teachers and to support students. We're going to explore the consistent lesson structure. And so you'll notice as you begin teaching this program and as you look through it today, there's a consistency to the weeks of instruction. And that helps you as a teacher kind of know what to expect. And that helps our students as well kind of be comforted in always knowing, you know, what the layout of this instruction is going to look like. And we're also going to consider how we can incorporate skill practice into lessons. And so there's a separate skill practice teaching guide at the 1st and 2nd grade level. And so later in our session, we're going to kind of divide up into different grade level groups and take a look at what that means in terms of developing those skills and conventions and mechanics for our students. So how are we going to work together today? We have 3 hours together. It's going to be fast and furious. I want to be sure that you have everything that you need to get going with your Being a Writer instruction. And so in order to do that, we're going to be working really hard today. I'm going to ask you to be taking some risks. You know, you're digging into something that you may know nothing about. So be willing to ask those questions, be willing to share your thinking. We want to always respect others, just honor that everyone has a voice. Some people may have more experience than others or different experiences, so we just want to keep that in mind as we engage in our conversations today. And we'll also try to have a little bit of fun along the way. All right, so the first thing we're going to do today is go into some breakout rooms. And so if you've never utilized the breakout feature before, you'll simply see a notification come up on your screen to join a breakout room. And it's essentially just a smaller virtual room with a fewer amount of people that you can have a deeper conversation in. And so I want you to do some reflecting on what writing instruction was like for you in elementary school. So for some of us, we may need to dig way back into that long-term memory to kind of pull that out. But I want you to really, you know, try and think about what that was like for you. In addition to introducing yourself. So you may be in a room with people you know, and you may be in a room with people you don't know. So be sure that you introduce yourself, share your building, share your role, and have this discussion about what you remember about writing instruction. So if you're like me and you get into a breakout room and you completely forget what it is that you're supposed to be talking about, I'll just pause here in case you want to take a quick screenshot of this slide so you can refer to it when you're in your smaller rooms. All right, so with that said, you'll see this invitation pop up on your screen, and I'm going to give you about 4 minutes or so for this activity, and you'll be called back from your breakout room just with another notification, so you don't have to worry about doing too much of anything. All right, so I hope you have a wonderful time kind of reflecting on what your own writing instruction was like, and I'll see you back here really shortly. Welcome back. The rest of the rooms will close in another 30 seconds or so.
Can't you just do that at the bottom left corner? Oh, that's how I do it. What? She's asked me about muting it. I showed her how I mute it. I noticed when you're on the meetings that you're never muted. So oh, seriously? Yeah. So how do you normally do it, Stephanie? Bottom left corner.
All right, welcome back everyone. All the rooms have closed. Hopefully you had a chance to say hello to some familiar faces, maybe meet some new people. But I would love to just quickly hear from just a representation of the different rooms, what writing instruction was like for you, what you remember about it. So I invite you to come off of mute and share, or feel free to share in the chat.
Well, breakout room 4 talked about how in elementary, most of us did not have a lot of memory of writing in elementary. And what memory we did, it was things that our teachers felt comfortable teaching, such as letter writing.
Yeah, I remember that too, Sherry. Lots of printing practice and cursive practice and lots of mechanics. So like I remember, you know, working really hard on like the capital and the period and the spacing and making the writing pretty, not necessarily sophisticated, right? Let's see in the chat. We've got some people who didn't really remember too much, but some of us had a project that we remembered. Spelling and grammar was not necessarily a good memory. We remember that we liked writing and especially creative writing. Awesome. We have lots of people coming in now. Okay. Let's see, we did remember a big emphasis on handwriting and having lots of prompts. We remember journals and sentences and more creative writing. So it sounds like kind of a wide variety, I guess probably depending on when it was that you went to elementary school, right? And so I'll just ask you to kind of consider your own memories of writing instruction and think about how you would like that to be the same or different from the students you're about to meet, okay? So if it was a good memory, how can we make that, you know, continue on for your students? And if it was a not so good memory, what can we do to make your students have a positive writing experience in these early grades? So with that said, I'm going to toggle back to my slide deck here and talk a little bit about who we are. So at Collaborative Classroom, if you're not familiar with our organization, it's not like most publishing companies or organizations in that we're a non-for-profit. And so what that means is we're really mission driven. And we have this goal of not only developing these readers and writers and thinkers in this literacy piece, but we also strive to develop that social emotional piece alongside. And so when I embarked on this being a writer journey 5 years ago, I knew there was that social emotional component to it, but I was really more excited about like the academic piece. But I was amazed, and we all were amazed at how our classrooms turned into these collaborative communities where our students just fed off of each other in this most positive way. They learned to respectfully disagree with one another. And I'm talking at the kindergarten, first and second grade level. It was just kind of this like added bonus that I really wasn't even expecting. But it's really powerful to kind of see it in action. And so that's going to happen for you all as well, because in the program materials that's outlined for you, whether you're teaching virtually or in person, there's a way that we can create these communities of writers and get our students really to see themselves as writers with that audience and with that purpose. And so the other piece of our organization and our mission is that we see the teacher as a facilitator of learning. And so we want our students to be doing the heavy lifting and doing the work, right? So at the end of a writing lesson, it should be the students who are exhausted and not us, because we're facilitating the learning, we're providing them what they need, we're encouraging them along the way, but the students are doing the heavy lifting. So I think you'll notice that too. As we go throughout our session today, I'm really serving as the facilitator and having you dig in and do the heavy lifting. So for this session, we're going to need access to the Being a Writer Teacher's Manual, Volume 1, the Skills Practice Teaching Guide in grades 1st and 2nd, so there's no Skills Practice Teaching Guide in kindergarten, and then the Being a Writer Assessment Resource Book. But do not worry if you don't have these materials in front of you. I have a Google folder created with PDFs of everything that you need, and you also have access to the Learning Portal. So the majority of you should be good to go with all of these materials. And so our first activity that we're going to dig in today is some individual work to provide ourselves an overview of what this being a writer thing is all about. So I'm going to ask you to just read through these sections of the introduction. And so if you have your print materials with you, this is that spiral bound book. It says volume 1 on it. And this is going to be included in all 3 grades. So I want you to look through the unique pedagogy and learn a little bit about the research base and the classroom tested aspect of being a writer. That dual focus of academic and social ethical learning that I just talked about, and teacher support. Then you're going to take a quick look at the program at a glance and look at writing development across the grades, the alignment with the standards, just kind of a quick brief outline of a typical daily lesson and how we can extend the instruction. You can also preview the different genres that are taught at your specific grade level in that introduction. So this seems like a lot. It's really succinct. So this literally is an overview. It's not going to tell you everything you need to know, but it's really going to give you that 30,000 foot overview, that gist, so that you have a common understanding that we can kind of build throughout our session today. So with that said, we are going to take, we'll take 10 minutes and engage in this work. What I would love for you to do as you're reading through these pieces is to identify 3 key parts that you've read that resonate with you, that are interesting to you, or that are kind of new to you that you want to call forward. Because following this work, we're going to go back into some breakout rooms and have a discussion. So I want you to have 3 things ready to share. So with that said, I'm going to plop the link to that Google Drive, that Google folder right into the chat if you need access to these materials. Otherwise, you can open up another window on your computer and log into the learning portal, or you can use your print materials. And if you need anything, you can communicate with me in the chat. So I just have to stop sharing my screen for a quick second while I pull up that Google link. I've got it right here. I just have to quick grab it. And if you are still having trouble accessing the materials, just message me in the chat and we'll find a workaround and do some problem solving. All right, so I'm setting my timer for 10 minutes and we'll circle back with you in a bit. Oh, one more thing, sorry. Sorry to interrupt your reading. If you are using the Google Drive, I do have the introductions to the 3 different grade levels, so you can find your specific introduction in there. Welcome back. The rest of the rooms will close in about 40 seconds. All right, looks like all the rooms are closed. I can always tell when there are good conversations happening because it takes folks longer to come back. And so I would love to hear what you talked about in your room. So you had an opportunity to dig into that introduction. You took a look at all of those kind of different components. and you were sharing some key pieces that you learned or that you read in your breakout room. So I want to kind of call forward some of what you talked about in your rooms to just like bring that learning to the forefront. So I invite you to come off of mute and share what you talked about in your room, or you can feel free to share that in the chat as well.
So room 8 talked a lot about that this curriculum, the writing curriculum, has the kids feel empowered, supports them taking risk, and also gives them a sense of responsibility with their writing. We really like that it's centered around community and social emotional development. We feel that's really good for our kids here in Grandview. Well, any kid, but. And then the third thing we talked about is that we really like that it's a collaborative approach. So the students are really working together a lot, doing some peer stuff, and that's what we liked.
Thank you for sharing. And like I mentioned earlier, Dawn, that was something that, you know, wasn't our goal when we selected being a writer. We selected it because we really liked the way it approached writing instruction. But the social emotional piece and that collaborative piece was just really enlightening. It really transformed our classrooms. There's a couple comments in the chat. So let's see here. Room 9 really liked the read aloud connection focuses on the social emotional needs of kids and collaborating. Yeah, I thought that was a really, you know, powerful way to approach writing instruction by looking at reading, right? Using those mentor texts and trying to emulate what real writers do really frees our students up for kind of focusing on the different practices in writing. So I'm glad that you were able to find that and pull that out. What else?
One thing that we talked about was where it said that the research showed that using a writing process with clear objectives, the kids' writing was much better than just giving them a prompt or a pattern to use to write.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that forward as well. And in my experience, I found that to be a game changer, really, as opposed to a student historically, you know, in like a personal narrative situation, we would give them a piece of paper and say, you know, write a story about something, you know, that happened to you. And so for a little kid, that's really hard. First of all, some of them don't have experiences to write about that are positive that they want to share with others. Secondly, just that idea of staring at a blank page is really hard. And so the power in being a writer, I found, is that we use some type of reading, a piece of literature, and the students process it, they comprehend the story. We talk about what that means in terms of writing. We have them, you know, visualize and develop some ideas in their head. We have them talk it out. We have them rehearse what they're going to write about so that when they go to their seat and they actually engage in that writing piece, they already know exactly what it is that they're going to write. They're just beginning to orchestrate it at that point. So I find a lot of power in that scaffolding process, but really it's also lends itself to independence in students. We do that work on the rug together, that getting ready to write phase. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a little bit, the different phases of a lesson. And we're really setting them up for success. So thanks for bringing that forward. We also have in the chat the focus on peer interactions, although this will be an interesting challenge with distance learning. There are lots of online resources that I'm going to share with you later within our last hour today, but really remember, we can only teach being a writer virtually if we know how to teach being a writer as it's intended. So that third hour that we're together today, we'll be digging into those online resources as well. Anything else that anyone would like to call out, bring forward before we watch a video of a lesson?
I know in room 1, we liked the simplicity of it. Like, I feel like since we've kind of all been, you know, I think one of us said all over the place, we've maybe been pushing our kids too hard. Like, hey, kindergartners, write 7 sentences. Hey, first grade, do you have a big old paragraph that you wrote with like your hamburger structure? And so this made it like much more realistic. And then we're all like really excited about like the online piece. So being able to like take those whiteboard activities and things and not have to like hold up a paper in front of our computer, but be able to pull it up online.
Yeah, so many things said there, Cindy. I can connect exactly with where you were because we were there too. The quota of number of sentences, right? And just everybody doing different things. And so I think you'll really appreciate the simplicity of it's simplistic, but it's rigorous and it's complex. But it really is where our students are developmentally. And when I piloted this that first year in kindergarten, my co-teacher and I would, talk after the lesson and say like, okay, like that went really well. Here's what we think they need next. And then we would turn the page and it would be there. And that happened many, many, many occasions. So it really just speaks to just that developmental nature. I think you'll find the sequence super supportive of you, super supportive of your students. And so lots of people are having some issues with video and audio glitchy. So hopefully it's not on my end. So yeah, sometimes turning off your video helps. Sometimes logging out and logging back in helps as well. All right, so let's dig back in here. If you have anything else you want to share, feel free to share that in the chat. We won't lose sight of it. We're going to take a look at a video of a being a writer lesson. So it's not a lesson in its entirety, it's little snippets, but it really gives you the idea of what an entire lesson kind of looks like. And so this is a first grade video, and we picked first grade because it's kind of right in the middle of kindergarten and second grade. And so I want you to know kind of what happened before what it is that you're going to see in this lesson. So these students that you're about to see have already completed Unit 1, which was developing that writing community. They've completed Unit 2, which was getting ideas. Unit 3, they learned how to tell more. And so right now, what you're about to see, they're in Unit 4, kind of almost all the way through that unit. And so they're working on writing stories about themselves. And this is the first week and the 4th day of instruction, okay? And so that's just kind of the context for what you're about to see. And so the goals, you'll find there's goals for a unit and goals for a week. And so this is really helpful, like when you're doing like newsletters or information for families, or when you're doing your own planning, you kind of have that overarching goal for the entire unit, and the units vary with the number of weeks. But then you have your specific weekly goals and you have your specific lesson goals. And so the Unit 4 goals are that students will explore personal narratives. They're going to tell and write about their own lives. They're going to learn that stories have a beginning, middle, and end. They're going to tell more in their stories. They're going to select and publish a story. They're going to learn to use exclamation points, and they're going to act responsibly and listen to others. So that's the overarching goals of the unit. But this particular week of instruction that you're going to see a lesson from, the goals of this particular week are that they're going to explore and write personal narratives, learn that those stories have a beginning, middle, and end. They're going to reread their stories and tell more. They're going to explore temporal words. They're going to review capitalizing proper nouns. They're going to listen respectfully to others, and they're going to share their own thinking. So this is the week of instruction. The lesson that you're going to see falls within that week. So just wanted to provide that context for you before we go ahead and watch that video. And so what I'll ask you to do as you're watching the video is just think about what you notice about the instruction, the facilitation, and what you notice about the students' thinking. And we'll have a conversation after the video. So it's about 6 minutes long. Again, it's not an entire lesson, but it's little snippets from the lesson so that you get the idea of kind of the gist of the whole lesson. All right, I'm just gonna make sure all my settings are correct so that you can see and hear everything. All right, so here we go.
Today we're going to think about how we can tell more in our writing. And you're going to help me today tell some more in my story about Ayuka's last day. I'm going to read the story, and I want you to be thinking to yourself about maybe something that I might want to add to my story. Okay? Last week was Ayuka's last day at Castro. Ayuka brought gifts for everyone. She answered questions about her new school. Ayuka stood at the doorway. She hugged each of us goodbye. What more might I tell about Ayuka's last day at school?
And everyone Mrs. Ayuka. Her mom said that they're gonna move to the same house.
And do you remember where that was?
Osaka.
In Osaka, right. Wow. Osaka, Japan, right.
That we made a book for her to look at in Japan. She was sad that she was leaving.
Okay, so I heard a lot of suggestions of things that we could add to our story. I heard she was sad that she was leaving. Where do you think I might put that? Would I put that at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the story? You know what I think? I think I'm going to be adding it to the beginning of the story, because I think that, you know, Ayuka, like Brandon was saying, Ayuka was sad that whole day. So I think that we're going to add that to the beginning of this story so that the reader really knows that it was Ayuka's last day at Castro, and she was sad that she was leaving. When you tell more in your stories, it really helps the story become clearer, and it makes it more interesting. And today, that is what you are going to be doing during your writing time. I'm asking each of you to add something to the beginning, something to the middle, and something to the end. So right now, I want you to look with your papers on the floor. I want you to look at the beginning of your story. Leave it on the floor and reread it one more time. Think to yourself, what might you add to the beginning of your story to tell more? Turn to your partner.
I'm gonna add what game I was playing. I'm gonna add that we make a huge cupcake. I'm gonna add that we also scored a lot of goals.
Okay, writers. What we're going to do right now is you're going to take those ideas that you shared with your partners, and you are going to write that in your booklets.
And live read. Good. I scored a lot of goals, and I dribbled and made a goal. We had 10 to 20.
And what are you adding to the beginning?
One of those things that you really want to do stuff.
To show strong feeling, an exclamation mark. And where are you adding that?
Right here.
Okay, writers, you all had a chance to add and tell some more in your beginnings and your middles and the ends. What we're going to do right now is you're going to get a chance to share that with your partners. So take a look at the end of your story. And I want you to share that with your partners, please. Turn to your partners.
And I tried to pull the ball backwards, but my leg went too far and I fell on my back. Me time. And then the bell rang and we had to freeze. And recess was over. The end.
Right now I want to talk about how it was with our partners. What did your partner do to show that she was interested in your writing?
That she was looking at my eyes when I was talking. That he listened to me when I was reading. That they didn't look away.
And how did that show you that they were interested in your writing?
Because they heard me.
You could tell they heard you?
She was looking at my story while I was reading it.
And how did that show you that she was interested in your writing?
She didn't turn away.
All right, writers. In the next week, we're going to be hearing some more stories from some great writers. to learn more about beginning, middle, and an end. And we're also going to be telling some more stories of our own and writing those stories and telling more.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Great.
All right. So I asked you, as you were watching that video, to be thinking about the teacher's facilitation, what you noticed about the instruction, and what you noticed about the students' thinking. And so we're going to go back into our breakout rooms just to have a conversation about what you noticed about the lesson that you saw, just also knowing that it was little snippets from throughout the lesson, but hopefully you got kind of that overall picture of what that looked like. And also how that lesson connected with what you've heard so far today or what you've read so far today. So with that said, I'll just pause so you can either jot down or take a quick pick of what it is that you'll be talking about within the breakout rooms. And you'll see those invitations pop up in just a moment. And we'll take 5 minutes for this conversation. Just a second, Rhonda, I'll get you into a room. There you go, you should see that pop up. Welcome back. The rest of the rooms will close in about 45 seconds. All right, we're all back. So welcome back. Hopefully you had a chance to debrief that video. I would love to hear what you talked about in your rooms. So anything enlightening that you want to bring forward, any questions that you have, go ahead and come off of mute or share those in the chat.
So room 8 had a lot of discussions. From what we saw in the video, we really liked the program and what we've read so far. Several things. We like that it seems like this program is going to mimic what we do in reading with Reading Workshop, and we use Fontes and Pinnell mini lesson book, and it seems like it mimics it where the students are turning and talking and the teacher is setting goals for them to go do it in their independent writing, and that's the same in reading. The other thing that we really liked was that accountable talk part, where they're checking to see if the other person is listening and speaking, and that's really going to help hit our standards for listening and speaking. So we liked what we saw. It was good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I love to, like, with that accountable talk piece, you know, everyone has a voice. And so we don't have enough time in our day, right, to hear from everybody. And so when we foster those partner conversations, we can go around and listen in and hear those conversations, and call forth particular students to share their responses. And you can do that virtually as well with breakout rooms. You can pop in and out, listen to individual conversations, and then bring that learning forward as well. Bethany shared in the chat There'd clearly been a lot of groundwork laid as far as working with a peer and showing active listening skills. And that was really evident. And that's also why I shared with you, kind of where they've been when I provided that context for the lesson. So this is Unit 4. And you'll find that in Unit 1, it's going to seem very repetitive and very redundant, but Unit 1 is really designed to set up that learning community and get everyone super solid in those practices and procedures so that you can dig deep into Units 2 and beyond. And so you saw the evidence of that hard work up front.
It felt like from watching the video, it wasn't a program where you just, here are the parts of a narrative, go out and write a narrative, but the teacher modeled and they just did very small pieces and chunks, one step at a time. And that way you were able to differentiate, because one student may be working on one piece and at one level, but then you have another student who's at another level. So you're able to differentiate, making it that small chunk at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Sherry.
And the students are really applying what she's teaching them. And that mimics the reading mini lesson too, is we teach them and then we want them to go apply it in independent reading. And it's the same thing here. So we really like that part too.
Yeah, you really see that gradual release of responsibility and action. And the unique piece too that was a little hard to get used to for me is sticking with that book for the whole week, right? And so we read that book for the first time to our students so that they can understand it and unpack it. And then we revisit it again with a different purpose to kind of pull out what it is that author did in terms of the craft of writing. And then we revisit it again in some cases. And so our students don't have any problem with it. It's more of us, but the more we can, bring that book alive and make connections to that book, our students really do start to see themselves as authors, which is really neat. Anything else? All right, so what we're gonna do is just talk through what a typical daily lesson looks like, and then I'm gonna show you kind of what that looks like on my screen. And so lessons are generally divided into 3 different sections. So we have the getting ready to write, the writing time, and then sharing and reflecting. And so for getting ready to write, that's where the direct instruction happens, okay? So the students, they gather to hear a story, a read aloud, they brainstorm ideas for writing, they participate in shared writing or modeled writing, they discuss how they'll work together. So we're really kind of setting them up for success, we're priming the pump. And then they move into writing time, and that's just a period of sustained writing that varies from the beginning of the year to the end of the year and from kindergarten through 2nd grade. And so you also have the opportunity to write with your students. You have the opportunity to observe them. You have the opportunity to assist them. You can confer with individual students. You can confer with groups of students while they're writing. And something I'll mention here that was also new and enlightening to me, you'll see in your program materials that encourages you to become a teacher as a writer as well. And so when you send your students off to write, when it's writing time, sometimes it'll ask you to go and sit and do some writing of your own. And I thought that was really unique and interesting. And I had a really hard time doing that at first because I needed to help my students get started. But what I found was the more I helped my students get started, the more they needed me to help them get started. And so when they see me sit down and do some writing of my own, I'm actually modeling how to get started on my own. And I have some writing that I've done as well that I'll also utilize to engage in some sharing and refining and revising and reflecting. So it's a really unique kind of idea with when it asks us to be a teacher as a writer. But I think it does a lot for our students in terms of, again, seeing that model, but also that opportunity for them to become more independent and getting started on their own. Because if we continue to help our students in kindergarten and 1st grade get started on our own, they're still going to expect us to do that in 2nd grade. And we want our students, remember, we've done the hard work in getting ready to write. They all have an idea. They've all talked it out with a partner. So they should be good to go, at least to get started. And then after a couple minutes, once everyone's kind of settled in, the teacher then gets up and begins that conferring or assisting process. And then finally, the third part of a typical daily lesson is that sharing and reflecting. And so the students are going to share and reflect on their writing. They're going to talk about the social interactions that they've had during that writing time. They're going to listen to each other. They're going to express their appreciation for one another's writing. Maybe they discuss what's working in their partnerships. Maybe they discuss some problems in their partnerships. And we talk about what they can do to avoid those problems in the future. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to, I just have it pulled up in my learning portal, and I'm going to show you all around the learning portal later. So don't worry about being able to find any of this. But I'm just going to, oops, hang on, I've got to do a new share here. Okay, let me stop share and let me start share. Okay. Can you see my teacher's manual? Can you give me a nod or a thumbs up?
Yes, we can.
Some people see it, it should say lessons. I see thumbs ups. Okay, great. Okay, so this is my digital teacher's manual on the learning portal. And so again, I'm going to show you how to access it later, so don't worry about that right now. I do just want to talk through a couple of the pieces so that you know how to utilize the manual when it's time for you to do that. So you'll always have an overview. And so I love this little paragraph. It's just really powerful. I even utilize this sometimes to share with parents because it's really just that gist. This is what they're doing in this unit. And it helps you as a teacher kind of wrap your head around what your students are going to be encountering. So as we make our way through the teacher's manual, we see the resources that are needed for this unit. We see the online resources that we can access for this unit. And then we see the overview for this unit. So this particular unit, I believe, okay, we're in grade 1. And so we have 5 weeks of instruction in 4 days. And so the number of days varies by grade level. And so the other important thing to mention here is you have 30 weeks of articulated instruction. So this program is 30 weeks. Typically a school year is about 40 weeks. And so you've got some wiggle room if you need to spend more time in one area, if you need to kind of, fit some other things in, around a particular period of time. There's opportunities to do that. So 30 weeks of instruction altogether. This first unit is 5 weeks of instruction. And in first grade, you have 4 days of instruction. So this is just like a chart that's really helpful for planning to talk about what the focus is for each day. You also see here there's open day activities. So if you like to operate on a 5-day kind of week, there are some ideas that you can use for that 5th day. These are also other opportunities that you can think about offering to students to do more independently as well. So with that said, I'm going to keep toggling through. So I've got my unit overview. Now I'm going to go into my week 1. And so week 1, it shows me the text that I'll be utilizing. It talks about some different beginning of the year considerations and the online resources I need for week 1. It talks about my focuses for week 1. It talks about what I should be thinking about doing ahead for week 1. And then there's that teacher as writer that I quickly mentioned. So we start here. Now we have our first lesson. And so day 1 of week 1, the title of the lesson is Getting Ideas for Writing Stories. And so here's the focus for this particular lesson. This is a teacher note. So anytime you see one of these, it's just important for you. It's just kind of some background knowledge for some content building. If it's a new genre, it will tell you what the genre is all about. So this is just about writing instruction early in the year. You also see a QR code. So you can use a device and scan that QR code, and that will pop up a video or a resource for you to kind of see what this looks like in action. So it's an opportunity for you to, kind of just take a little check-in and see what that would look like. There's also a technology tip down here as well. And so I've often thought that whenever I've looked at like a teacher manual, that the stuff in the margins was like fluff. Well, this isn't fluff, friends. I really want you to kind of pay attention to this because there's some really good things in the margins here. Okay, so remember there's 3 components of a daily lesson. Component 1 is getting ready to write. So here we go. We're getting started. We're introducing the writing community. We're learning and practicing the procedure for gathering. We're briefly discussing writing experiences. We're reading aloud. We're discussing the story. and we're visualizing ideas. So that getting ready to write, that's a big chunk of time, especially on day one. You're gonna find on day one, we spend a lot of time on getting ready to write because that typically involves the reading of a story. In the beginning of the year, they don't have as much stamina, so they're not necessarily spending as much time during that writing time. And things will tighten up as the year progresses. And so you'll see different charts, some examples of charts. You see in your program materials the open-ended questions that you can ask students, some suggestions for vocabulary. So as you're reading this book, Things I Like Aloud, there's suggested vocabulary, some clarifications if you have ELL students. So super supportive of teachers, super supportive of students. Remember, there's 3 parts of a typical daily lesson. I just showed you getting ready to write. Here's writing time. So in this particular lesson, we're learning the procedures for writing time. And then the 3rd part is that sharing and reflecting. So we always want to bring it back at the end of our lesson to kind of capture what was learned, celebrate, and motivate to come back the next day. So I'm just going to flip through here just to show you and see if there's anything else that I want to point out to you. So you see this class assessment note. Anytime you see a gray box, it's an opportunity to assess. You have an assessment resource book. We're not going to dig too heavily into that today. With the new implementation, I just want you to know that you have opportunities to assess your students. And these are the questions that you'll ask yourself, and this is sort of a formative assessment. And so you'll ask yourself these questions. And if you're feeling like this is not happening, then it gives you some ideas of what you can do to kind of supplement that work. So for example, are the students writing quietly? Are they staying in their seats? So it says if you notice students having difficulty staying in their seats or writing quietly, it gives you an idea of what to do. So it's like a quick formative assessment. Kind of just ask yourself, are all of my students doing this, most of this doing this, or maybe just a few of them doing this? So then we're on day 3. So again, those 3 stages you can see: getting ready to write, writing time, and reflecting, okay? And there's our day 4. So you'll see here, sometimes you'll see extensions. And so this is an opportunity to just kind of extend the learning. These are optional, however, super purposeful. And a lot of the standards are found within these extension opportunities as well. And don't think of them as enrichment. They're not necessarily enrichment. They're literally an extension of the instruction. So to further solidify what was worked on and to extend that idea. And here are your open day activities. And so every week you'll see some opportunities. You know, maybe you want to choose to do them, maybe not. Maybe you don't have an open day, maybe you do. So that's just kind of a quick snapshot of what a week of instruction looks like. So I'm going to stop sharing and just open it up for any questions or noticings that you have before we dig into the next part of our time. So Dawn asked in the chat, is there a time for each part of the lesson? So it doesn't necessarily break it down, but what I have found for myself is we all have a different amount of time allotted in our schedule for writing instruction. So if I have 30 minutes of writing instruction, I'm going to kind of pace out my lesson to say, I need to spend 10 minutes on getting ready to write, 15 minutes on the writing part, and then the rest of my time will be spent sharing and reflecting. Or if I have 45 minutes of time for my writing block, I'm gonna do maybe 20 minutes on getting ready to write, 20 minutes on the writing, and then 5 minutes on the sharing and reflecting. So you can spend more or less time where it's needed. It's not necessarily laid out for you as far as how much time each component lasts. It really depends on, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So really that's up to us, but would you say that most of the time, whether you have 30 minutes or 45, the majority of that time is in the writing and then maybe what I would consider the mini lesson? Or
So Dawn, what grade do you teach?
Second.
Second, okay. So you're gonna want some more time in that sustained writing time. So your getting ready to write might be a little bit shorter, you know, so say you have 40 minutes, I would do, you know, like 15 getting ready to write, and then a larger chunk during that writing time. I find that in kindergarten, that getting ready to write seems to take a little bit longer, because we're still building those processes for turning and talking and calling forth attention, and they don't have the stamina to write for 20 minutes at the kindergarten level, especially in the beginning of the year. By the end of the year, they should. And so the best answer to your question is it really depends. You just kind of have to play with the time that you have. But just know that day one, that getting ready to write, that first part, that mini lesson, it includes the read aloud. And so it takes a little bit longer.
And
In some cases, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And then I mimic Amanda's too. That was my other question is, I know you talked about the first hour would be just going through the series, and then the next hour you're going to talk about how to adapt it virtually. So you'll be getting to that, right?
Yeah, yep. We're going to be, yes, we have remote learning guidance specific to being a writer. And so we'll have a document that we'll examine. I plan to start that at 11 o'clock my time, so 10 o'clock your time. And so we'll dig into all of that. But the idea is when you're teaching anything remotely, you want to keep as much integrity of the program as you can, because let's cross our fingers, we're not going to be teaching this virtually forever. So I want you to have everything that you need for when we eventually do go back into person. So that's why we're doing kind of this process where, understanding the program as it's intended. And then that last hour together, we'll spend talking about what that's going to look like virtually.
I have a question for you. I know you said you piloted the kindergarten version. Is that correct?
Yep.
How quickly would you say you jump into Unit 1? Just because I know from my standpoint is most of our kids who come in don't know their letters and sounds. And I mean, they're already, I see they're modeling like beginning sounds and pictures of words already. And also like they don't have letter formation for a good chunk of them. So did you guys, I guess, start Unit 1 right away, or did you kind of wait a little bit?
Yeah, we started right away. And so I would encourage you at the kindergarten level, when you guys have some time, to take a look at the assessment resource book. There's different stages of writing development, as you know. And so even if students are scribbling at the beginning stage, that's still writing. And so when they talk about their story, we still honor that story, obviously, and they all have a story to tell. It's going to look different for all of your kindergartners, but I wouldn't hold back on any of the writing instruction, because we're really working in that first unit to build that community of writers, incorporate those structures for sharing, in those processes. And so by the time you get into Unit 2, hopefully your students have, grasped a little bit in terms of letter formation based on the reading instruction that you're doing, and they'll be good to go. But I don't think that's abnormal that your students are coming in with very little, letter formation. Ours were the same. We have many students who come in without any schooling experience. And so we're starting from scratch with them.
Yeah.
So I would recommend just, go ahead and get started with that. And just know that even scribbling on the paper is still telling a story for that particular student. And so I think you'll find too, especially in kindergarten, and this was a little bit of a struggle for me, like I want to get to the letters and sounds part, right? But the reality is you're never going to get students to that letters and sounds part in a meaningful way unless they have a story to tell. And so you're really going to begin in kindergarten and all of the grades by honoring that. What do you think? What do you know about? Draw and write about something that's read. I think that's one of the lessons in kindergarten. And so whatever they scribble or draw or do, like that's their story, and we honor that and celebrate that. And as they continue to develop, because we all know reading and writing are reciprocal processes, right? And so as they begin to learn those skills in reading, they'll transfer those over to writing. And you can still continue to pull in those other resources that, maybe you utilize a handwriting chart or a letter sound linking chart. So pull that work into what you're doing with being a writer to support your students. But that's really the idea that you're going to find in being a writer, is we're really honoring that story development. And because we know that that letter sound application piece will come. All right. So with that said, let's talk about some skills. So what we're going to do next is we are going to move into some exploration of skill practice instruction. And so grades 1 and 2 have a skill practice teaching guide. So kind of like what Jennifer and I were just talking about, this being a writer instruction in those 3 or 4 days of instruction, depending on your grade level, we're really developing the writer. We're honoring the stories that they have to tell. We're guiding them in that process. There is skill instruction incorporated in those lessons, but that also can exist outside of your being a writer, teacher's manual. And so at first and second grade, we have a skill practice teaching guide. So kindergarten, hang on for just a second. We'll touch base in a second. So first and second grade, what you're going to engage in next is an exploration of that skill practice teaching guide. So you're going to do some work digging into the materials. Again, maybe you have print materials. If not, this is accessible on the learning portal, but it's also in that Google Drive that I shared with you. And so what you're going to dig into is that introduction of that guide. And so just like you did for the introduction to the teacher's manual, just get a sense of what's included. Think about how you might use the diagnostic assessment that's in Appendix C, and that will be outlined for you in the introduction as well. And then think about what other ways you might incorporate those skill practice teaching guide lessons into the Being a Writer program. All right, so first and second grade, you're going to dig into that work. So a little bit of an overview of that. There's 30 mini lessons incorporated in that skill practice teaching guide. 5 of them are review lessons from the previous grade. And so I'm going to have first and second grade teachers dig into that work in a minute. Kindergarten, you're going to focus on the beginning of writing. And so Jennifer, this kind of relates to the conversation that we just had. And so this is also in that Google folder. It's a PDF. And so I'm going to have you dig into the reading of that. It's called The Beginning of Writing. So it's kind of that process that children go through as they're learning how to write. And I want you to think about, where do you have opportunities to support skill development in this phase? And also, what skills are addressed in the kindergarten curriculum, okay? And so you can feel free to review any lessons that you have access to identify those opportunities for skill practice. So here we're talking about those specific skills for writing and not like that writing process as a whole. So this is kind of that supplement to that work. And so it says breakout rooms, but I'm gonna have you just kind of hang here and do that individual work, and then we'll call that learning forward in just a bit. So I'm gonna pop that link back into the chat so that you have it nice and fresh.
Liz, can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
So is it really up to each grade level to then decide where to put those skill lessons in and when to teach those skill lessons alongside the Being a Writer?
So there's a couple different ways that you can think about the skill lessons. So the first way is to literally start with that first lesson and do 1 a week. So that's the first option. The second option is to administer the diagnostic assessment and determine what skills certain students need and kind of do needs-based skill groups, okay? So more differentiated approach. Or the third way is there are skills recommendations incorporated into the Being a Reader lessons. They kind of align with the instruction there, and so you can do it that way. So there's different options. I'll share with you that the first year we piloted, we didn't do anything with skill just because it was like really overwhelming to think about like managing that. And so that's going to be up to your district to decide, but we're sharing with you the information. It's a really great supplement to the work because oftentimes that's where we were feeling like we needed kind of that supplemental piece. That's what we were conferring with students about, was the skill stuff, because we set them up for success with that idea piece. So I know that was probably not super helpful because I really didn't give you a direct answer.
No, it is. And for our grade level, second grade has already paced it out, and we're just going to do a lesson. We're just going to go through 1 lesson a week.
Perfect.
And we'll use some supplemental stuff if we need to, besides just that 1 lesson. So it's fine. I just want to know if we were able to do it that way.
Yeah, yep, it's completely up to you. And we've also had second grade teachers administer like the first grade diagnostic for struggling students to kind of pinpoint those who need that instruction maybe at a lower level, if that makes sense. So when you're thinking about the different levels of support, I mean, we're getting kind of sophisticated and digging in really deep here, but that's another consideration.
And where are those, is that in this, the diagnostic assessments that you're talking about?
Is that the skill practice teaching guide?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's in Appendix C.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so for those of you who are like, what am I supposed to be doing? I'm gonna take you back to the Google Drive and show you. 1 second, let me open it. Okay. All right, so where are we? Here we are. Okay, so second grade teachers, you're gonna look at grade 2 skill practice teaching, all right? First grade, you're gonna look at grade 1 skill practice teaching. Kindergarten, you're gonna look at the beginning of writing, okay? So everything that you need is gonna be right here for you in this Google folder, and we'll take 5-ish minutes to kind of scan this work, and then we'll have a conversation. I'll put that slide back up as well.
Liz, I have one more question. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
I'm looking at the diagnostic language skills test. Is
Yeah.
that something they would do online, or is it a paper pencil? And where is it if it is online?
I'll show you when we get to the learning portal.
Okay, all right.
I have a question that kind of builds on Dawn's question about
Yeah.
that diagnostic assessment. So since we're all starting virtual, but so is that something that we would do, like, do you think would be better if we like popped it into like a seesaw type activity and had the kids do, or more of a let's Zoom session with them and do it like a one-on-one?
So I found for our students in our first year of implementation, it was probably tricky for them to do kind of on their own just as an assignment. However, I don't know your students and I don't know their kind of ability level and all of that. So I would take a look at the assessment and then make a decision based on what you know about your students. I think either way would work. I know that sometimes, you know, that seesaw piece, we may have some family members helping, and so we might not get necessarily an accurate representation of what our students can do. So the Zoom option might be a little bit better. I can also see it even being maybe an opportunity to kind of do, you know, even a whole group Zoom thing. So if the students had access maybe to the, I'm not sure how students, if we can have them have like a paper copy of something in front of them and you kind of walk them through each of those questions, say, okay, number one, find number one. And then, so you can make some considerations for what that's gonna look like for you. But it sounds like what, I can't remember if it was Dawn maybe, shared that her grade level kind of already pasted out and thought maybe they would just teach the skill practice lessons in order from 1 to 30 across the series.
And Liz, I have another question. I know that this is the diagnostic language skills. Does the writing, the being a writer, have an initial, like maybe writing prompt and then a way of assessing just their overall writing capabilities?
Yeah, so there is an assessment resource book that it's that white book. I believe it's white. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's white. Yep, that one. And so for all of the grades, it recommends a beginning of the year assessment where the students draw and write about something that makes them happy. And then we do that same prompt in all of the grade levels at the beginning and ending of the year. And so what we did in the school district that I worked in is we collected those and almost made like a portfolio to show the growth of what makes me happy at the beginning of kindergarten, end of kindergarten, beginning of first grade, end of first grade, beginning of second, end of second. And so my building was K2. So by the time they left second grade, it was just kind of this record of their writing process of what, you know, they would draw and write about something that makes them happy. So that assessment is called for within your program. In the assessment resource book, there's guiding questions that you can use to assess your students' writing and make a plan for instruction. There's assessments after each unit of instruction as well. And in first and second grade, it provides you more of like a score, like on a rubric.
Right.
And at kindergarten, you're looking more at the stages of writing development. So you're moving from scribbling, just letter-like symbols, to strings of letters, to initial and medial sounds, eventually to conventional writing, which is kind of our goal, for the end of kindergarten. And so that assessment resource book will take you through, that assessment process, but your teacher's manual will signal you for those assessment opportunities. It'll say like, okay, we're at the end of the unit, go to your assessment resource book and pull out the assessment for the end of the unit. So it'll signal you to go and do that. So I hope that helps.
Is there, in the state of Missouri, we have some language standards. Like, for example, one of them is, knowing the 4 types of sentences and being able to write, declarative, imperative, and so on. Does the skills, besides that initial, getting to know them as far as grammar, does it build in assessments in that the skills one, or is it just basically lessons?
Yeah, so there are lessons. I'll have to look back and see for your grade level specifically if there are other assessment opportunities involved in that skill practice teaching guide. But in terms of like the standards piece, I'll show you when we get to the learning portal, we have a standards correlation guide on there, so you can see which particular lessons address those particular standards.
Okay, and then one more question.
Yeah.
I know that being in a writer, there's, like you were talking about, there's a rubric for each, like, let's say, segment of lessons. So, we teach telling more, and then 3 days later, you kind of assess whether they've applied those skills. And then you just kind of do that throughout that unit, right? And then at the end, you're getting that score of how they did. Is there anything besides that? Like, let's say we're teaching them personal narrative, or that's the kind of unit. Is there anything like a grant, like a big then right, that we would assess using a rubric?
So so you'll assess their published writing and their non-published writing, and the assessment resource book will take you through that. And you also utilize your conference notes as well when you're kind of looking at this. So there's never like a stop and give assessment.
Okay.
We're assessing kind of that progress throughout the unit.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks.
I'll take a look for the next, I'm going to go glance at that skill practice teaching guide. And so I'll be able to answer your question a little bit better in just a second about the assessment of that skill piece.
Hey Liz,
Yes.
I have a question. So I am looking at the shared Google folder and I see I am a teacher, so I'm looking at the grade 2 skill practice teaching PDF, but I'm curious, where do we find, if we do find it in the drive, where can we find the Appendix C with that?
Okay, yeah, so Appendix C isn't in the drive, but what I'll do is I will open that up for everyone so that they can see what that looks like.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think it was, but I just thought maybe I missed something. I
No,
have
thanks for
my
asking.
little box of being a writer. I just haven't dived into it yet. So it's probably
Okay.
in there.
Yeah, no, so Appendix C would be in the skill practice teaching guide. It's just in the back.
Okay.
And then I just took a quick peek at that skill practice teaching guide. And Dawn, this is in response to your question. In Appendix B, there is the scoring. So kind of how you would assess your students in terms of the skill practice. So Appendix B, and I'll type that in the chat. Okay, so Appendix B is going to help with that. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and just show you, because I know you're curious about what that particular Appendix C looks like. So, got to go back to, let's see here. All right, so here's Appendix B, and this talks about the skill practice assessment. So how you can score those skill practice pages. So that will provide guidance for the assessment of this work. And then in terms of Appendix C, this is the grade level language skills assessment. And so this gives you the guidance for conducting the assessment, and scoring the assessment, and analyzing the assessment. And so this obviously shows you, you know, what it will look like. This is kind of like the answer key, but it tells you what skill is being assessed. So when you go to kind of record those scores, for example, with using common, proper, and possessive nouns, item number 1 and item number 16 addressed that skill. And so you can note here how many they got correct. And then lesson number 8 and lesson number 14 in the skill practice teaching would address that skill. So if you're using the diagnostic approach, you can see how you can really hone in and teach the needed skills to particular students based on their performance on the diagnostic. And then this is an even more expanded version of what that would look like. So if you're wanting to group students, this is a form you could utilize. So, say you had 3 students who need lesson 8 and 14, you could even jot their names right in here. And so there's an opportunity to do task 1. You could do that in the fall. And then you could do maybe task 2 in the spring so that you can get a clear picture of really addressing those students' needs. So same thing for task 2. All right, so hopefully that helped just kind of dig into that skill practice teaching work and a little bit deeper of an idea. So let's call forward what you read, what you learned about when we had our 1st and 2nd grade teachers looking at that skill practice, and then our kindergarten teachers looking at the beginning of writing. So go ahead and come off of mute and share anything that resonated with you or something that you really want to bring forward. Or you can share in the chat.
I don't have anything to bring forward, but the diagnostic skills task in our guides has it is like the answer key. So the one for the kids, is that only an online resource?
I believe it's also in the book. Let me just double check. I've seen it in there before, I think. So hang on, let me go back. See? Yep, I saw the answer key version. Let me see where it would be. I'll show you where it's located on the learning portal,
Okay.
because yeah, it looks like the version in the book is the answer key. Let me just keep going and see. Yeah, all the answers are underlined in there, so yes. Yep, I'll show you where that's located on the learning portal. All right, so I'm gonna write that down. So I'm gonna write down standards.
Stacy, I know that in the second grade book, the task is at the very end of the student workbook.
Oh, is it? Okay, let
Yeah.
me take a look back there. Thank you
So-
for that. I know
Yeah.
I saw it in there somewhere. I
It's
figured it was.
and there are no answers on it. So it's at the very back of the book.
Oh,
Let's see here.
thank you.
Did we find it?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Yeah, I knew it was in there somewhere. I don't know why. It would make more sense to have it in the appendix, but I'm glad we were able to locate that. Okay, so with all of that said, we are going to move into thinking about being a writer in terms of our remote learning guidance. And we're going to take a look at the resources that we have available for us to teach this remotely. So with that said, we are going to dig into this work. So as we engage in this part of our session today, I want you to be thinking about, first and foremost, your students. We want to kind of filter through our synchronous and our asynchronous priorities. So what do we need to do when we have our students in front of us, and what are some things that they can be doing maybe when they're not necessarily right in front of us? Think about your planning for opportunities that are going to strengthen independence, and think about your virtual platform, okay? So I'm going to take you on a pretty extensive tour of the learning portal. So you don't have to follow on your own learning portal. I'm just going to ask that you follow me on my learning portal as we go on this little tour here. It's pretty easy to navigate. So granted, I've been navigating it for some time now. So just kind of follow along, and I'll point out some key places that you're going to want to refer to. And I wrote down a couple of the other pieces that I wanted to be sure that I showed you. And if there was anything else that you wanted to see, let me know at the end of the little tour, and I can point those out to you as well. Okay, can I get a thumbs up or a nod if you can see my learning portal? Okay, great. All right, so I've just logged onto my learning portal, and I've got these navigation tabs across the top. So I've got probably a lot more than you have on yours. But if you have ClassView Pro, you should have ClassView Pro. This is an opportunity for you to administer assessments online. It will house your assessments online as well. And so the ClassView Pro tutorial will give you all of the steps and guidance in order to utilize that ClassView Pro app. The only thing is you'll need to enter your students' names into that so that you can assess. So you have to have students in there before you can begin the assessment. In terms of resources, this is where all of our typical resources lie. So if I go down to being a writer, grade 1, now I have lots of chiclets. Remember, I work for this organization, so I support lots of different programs. But we have being a writer. I'm going to click on grade 1, but we also have being a writer writing samples and being a writer frequently asked questions. So those are some important things to check out as well. So when I click on being a writer, I have access to a couple different navigations within being a writer. So on the left-hand side, I see all of the units. And so as I toggle through the units, the different resources pop up. So if I want to look at unit 1, within week 1, I've got 4 days of instruction. So for day 1, I've got a video of what building community of writers would look like, setting up procedures for the year, and introducing vocabulary during a read aloud. So if you remember those QR codes you saw in the lesson, this is the same video that would have opened up on your QR code. Day 2 is a class assessment record sheet. Remember that gray box I showed you? This has the same questions as that gray box. This is also in your assessment resource book. So remember, we're going to ask ourselves, are the students writing quietly? Are they staying in their seat? And this is something that you can choose to fill out or not, but definitely take note of it. And then some considerations about students doing that and how to support them. There's a writing drawing chart that's called for. So this is something that can be displayed and annotated if you have the annotation feature on your Zoom, which I do right here. So if I'm teaching remotely, I can draw, say I want to draw a picture of a, well, I have blue, but if I'm going to draw a tree, I can annotate right here on Zoom. I can say, actually I can use the text feature. I climbed a tree today. And so that annotate feature on Zoom is going to be useful. And then you can erase mistakes. There's a lot of different things you can do. I can, let's see here.
Liz, do we automatically have that annotating feature, or is that something we have to download?
That's a great question. It's on Zoom, so I'm not sure what your Zoom accounts entail, but if you don't, it would be like a great request to have, because I feel like you can do a lot with that annotation feature through Zoom. So this is one option of what you can do as you're utilizing that particular resource. Oops, I forgot. I forgot that's the problem with it. It doesn't disappear unless you erase it.
Hey, Liz.
Oh man, yes.
I know that we talked about this yesterday in one of our meetings. I don't think we have that paid version of Zoom that lets you do all that annotating.
Okay, good. Thanks for letting me know. I won't show you any more of that. But maybe it will come. But the hope is that, you know, you won't really necessarily, hopefully, be remote for long. It's my hope. So that's good to know. Okay, so back to Being a Writer resources. Everything that you need for writing instruction is right here. And you can, even if you don't have the annotation feature, you can have something right here. You know, you can teach any way. You can share a different screen. You can share a Google Doc. You can draw and write on a Word document that you share your screen. So whether you have that feature or not, it's not essential. You can share your screen showing anything that you're writing and drawing, but that writing and drawing chart is available to you. Okay, with that said, so you can see here where all of your typical resources lie within all of the different units, within all of the different lessons as you toggle through. The resources for the Skill Practice Teaching Guide are right here in this navigation tab. So you see we have the record sheets, and here is where you can find the digital version of the different tasks that your students can utilize. Okay, so this is that version that does not have the answers, and our colleagues pointed out it's also in their workbook, their student workbook. So everything that you need for these particular lessons are going to be within the Skill Practice Teaching Guide piece. And then in the grade 1 general resources, and again, this looks the same for kindergarten and first grade. So even though second grade, even though I'm showing you first grade, it's gonna look the same for the other grade levels. We have some other resources here, some planning resources. So the scope and sequence for being a writer, kind of outlining what that's gonna look like fall, winter, spring for each grade level. Some different presentations, reproducibles. So if you need that student skill practice book and you don't have the actual bound workbook, we have PDFs of all of that. If your students need to, redo something, you can use that PDF. And if you need to teach a lesson, you can share screen and utilize the skill practice teaching book in that way as well. So this is essentially what your students have in that workbook form. And then any other resources, we have a Being a Writer online course, which just has a bunch more information. Much of it is similar to what I'm sharing with you today. So over here is where you get access to your digital teacher's manual. So this is what I had pulled up earlier. So if you click right here and digital teacher set, you can pull up any of the manuals that you have in print form. So I'm just going to click on volume 1, and my teacher's manual is going to pop right open in just a minute. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer when I'm sharing my screen. And so I can use my table of contents to navigate to whatever unit I'm in. So say I want to get to unit 2, I'm just going to click on unit 2, and this is what I toggled through earlier as I showed you all that was encompassed in those lessons. So I have the Teachers Volume 1, Volume 2, the Skill Practice Teaching Guide, and here's the assessment resource book. And I want to just pull this up because I know you had a bunch of questions about assessment. And so this is grade specific, but if you toggle through, we have overview of assessment, the different assessment opportunities that we have, and the stages of writing development with samples. And so I mentioned that beginning of the year writing sample. All of the assessments are clearly supported in how you'd prepare for them, how you'd conduct them, and how you would analyze them. As well as, these are the class assessments, those gray boxes that you see coming up in your program materials. And then at the end of each unit, there is an individual writing assessment. And so this is not the class assessment, this is geared towards an individual student. And so the assessment is outlined, there's examples, there's rubrics for you. So again, there's one of those for each unit. All right, I'm just gonna quick check the chat. I see a few things that are coming up. Okay, what's the difference between the Learning Portal and Learning Hub? That's a really great question. So the Learning Hub is where all of our collaborative classroom resources used to be. It wasn't as user-friendly, and it wasn't, I don't know, I guess 20th century enough to be able to do what we need it to do. And so everything has been transitioned over to the Learning Portal and then some. The Learning Portal is much more user-friendly. It talks to other systems. There's an opportunity to have a single sign-on. And so the Learning Portal is where we're encouraging all new implementations to create accounts and licenses on. So if you see anything in your program materials that say Learning Hub, you're gonna think Learning Portal. In the ClassView app, I'll show you what that looks like. That's where you have to have that, you have to have your class set up in there. And so I do have a class set up in mine, so I can show you that in just a minute. I'll write that down as well, just so you can see kind of what that looks like. The ClassView app is that online assessment tool that can house your assessments online. All right, so back to being a writer. Okay, I think I showed you everything I want to for those typical resources. But what we're gonna go to next is the Professional Learning and Implementation tab. Again, I have a lot more here than you have on yours that you need to know about, but you probably are going to see an online course. And so that's an opportunity for you to continue to learn more about being a writer. So that's certainly a good opportunity for you to check out. There's also the teacher learning system. The Being a Writer stuff is coming soon, but again, that's going to help you continue to learn more about implementation of being a writer. I'm gonna go next to the remote learning guidance. And so you have a link to this in that Google Drive, but these are all the programs that we have. I'm gonna click on Being a Writer. And we have the remote learning guidance for being a writer in PDF form. And in just a little bit, we're gonna take a look at that in depth. But here's that ClassView Pro app. And so it's gonna take me to, I have a sample class. And this is only for those who like really want, this is only for those who really want to do these assessments online. This is a new kind of application. So I can click on, I want to do this on sample 1, and I'm going to click on, do I have being a writer? Let's see. Click on Johnny. And I don't know if I have it linked to my being a writer, but let me quick see. Okay, being a writer. So I've clicked being a writer. You'll only have being a writer, so you won't have to navigate between all of these other pieces. But if I click Jimmy and I click skill practice teaching guide, I can give him the language skills assessment right here, and it will house all of his data right here on ClassView Pro. So I'm not going to go too much more in depth with the ClassView Pro than that. It's pretty easy to navigate. I would click what the student chose. It would go to the next question. And then when I was done, I could show a summary. I could print it as a PDF. It will house it on here. It's pretty intuitive, pretty easy to, this person got 1 of 22 correct. There's some information right here as well. I can add notes. I can generate a PDF. But this tutorial will really outline the rest of that app for you, okay? All right, so back to that remote learning guidance piece, being a writer. What I'm gonna have you do next is take some time to go through that, okay? So I'm gonna toggle back to my slideshow and kind of set you up for this next activity, digging into that remote learning guidance. All right, so we're gonna take some time and do some independent work, and we're gonna read the introduction to that remote learning guidance. So I showed you where you can find it. So if you wanna be brave and hop on the learning portal and pull that up, you can. It's also in that shared Google Doc. Okay, so it's in that folder. And we're first just gonna read the introduction. Okay, so read the introduction to the remote learning guidance document. And as you complete your review, I want you to share a key learning from that in the chat. So we're gonna we'll start with 5 minutes and dig into that introduction of the remote learning guidance. And like I said, as you complete it, share a key learning right there in the chat.
Liz, yesterday I had attempted to get on the online resources. And so I think I went to the wrong one because I clicked on the Learning Hub.
Okay.
And so now it's asking me to do a 60-day trial for the Learning Portal. So how do I get to the Learning Portal? I went somewhere wrong.
Okay. So to get to the Learning Portal, you're going to go to ccclearningportal.org. And I'm also going to include the steps for creating an account. And so I'll link that in the chat as well.
Okay.
But for now, go ahead and grab that remote learning guidance from that Google Drive. I'm going to pop that back in the chat. So you should be able to click on that link you see in the chat and then find the file that says remote learning guidance.
Okay.
And in the meantime, I'm going to grab that link for getting set up on the learning portal and share that as well.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to read through that introduction. I know some people are having some trouble getting on the learning portal. During our time together, I'd rather just have you read through that remote learning guidance than problem solve the learning portal. We can do that kind of offline after our time together. So as you're finishing, thank you to those who've already shared your key learnings in the chat. Continue to do so. And then we'll bring some of that thinking forward. So this is just the introduction. We'll look at the grade specific guidance in just a moment. All right, so as you wrap up your reading of the introduction, I asked you to share some learnings in the chat. So in between some learning portal problem solving pieces, we have Cindy mentioning that she loves the remote schedule considerations. She noticed that it's limited to 3 30-minute live sessions per day at her grade level, and that will help as we plan what our day will look like virtually. So thinking about those priorities. Bethany noticed that as you're setting up expectations and norms in your classrooms, you have to do it for distance learning as well. And so I totally agree with you, and that's really our stance and our approach at Collaborative Classroom. We're really trying to replicate that in-person instruction in the best way that we can. And so it'll be important, you're right, for families to get on board with how they will support learning at home. Nina noticed those Spanish versions of the IDR page for parents and caregivers. And the suggested remote schedule will be super helpful. And then Dawn reminded everyone we're not giving out the handbook and practice book. So do we have suggestions on how we can use those without students having the books? So we'll think about that as we dig into the grade specific guidance. But I will share, because you're all working with younger students, and I don't think I shared this at the beginning, but I actually coordinate student teaching for Nazareth College outside of Rochester, New York. And so I'm preparing teachers right now who are going into student teaching for virtual instruction. So I've done a lot of work, especially around how we can do this with our younger students. And something I came across that I thought was a really brilliant idea, because our students can't really type into the chat box super efficiently, right? We can give them options. And so, for example, say we're engaging in a read aloud of Being a Writer and we're asking them to make a prediction. We could say, do you think Baby Bear, say it's a book about like Baby Bear or whatever, do you think Baby Bear is going to jump into the river and catch the fish? Or do you think he's going to get scared and walk the other way? If you think he's going to jump into the river and catch a fish, put the number 1 in the chat box. And if you think he's going to get scared and run away, put the number 2 in the chat box. So that way your students are still doing that thinking. They're still engaged in that work. You have a sense of what they're thinking. And that was just one idea I read about that I thought would be super helpful for our younger students, who we don't want them to spend their entire time with us typing a sentence into the chat box. It's not a good use of time, right? And so that's just one way that, that I read about. Another way is just having like a whiteboard or a piece of paper with like a thumbs up or thumbs down, and you ask a question and then you just ask them whether, do they agree? And they can either be like, yes, or no. So whatever that ends up looking like. So having things that they can kind of flip or utilize their hand for, those are different ways they can maximize their time when you have them kind of synchronously with you.
I have another question.
Yeah.
I was reading about the note about the read alouds.
Yes.
And that we're supposed to request permission from the copyright holders of those books.
Yeah.
And then also that when you record that story, like if you're doing a read aloud and you're recording it, that through YouTube, it has to be set on private. How can the parents and the students view it if it's set on private?
I think it would need to be set. I think it means more in like a private setting, so not a public setting for all to see. So you would select unlisted. So you guys have Seesaw, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, sending the unlisted link through Seesaw would be on a private kind of platform.
But every time we use one of the trade books for the lesson, we have to get permission from the copyright holder.
So at Collaborative Classroom, we do not have publishing rights to those books. So that's in the guidance document. I know some districts have had like a district point person who has done that, just kind of like for the whole grade level to get that permission. And so that's one option. I did read, so we have a Collaborative Classroom Facebook community page where people just come together and just share resources and share ideas. But I did read something on there last night that said that one of the members of the community, the Facebook community group, wrote to Houghton Mifflin and Harcourt and a couple of the other publishing companies, and they're good to go. So there was just like one general kind of email for the district. And so the idea here is really just like, we do not own the rights to those books. So that guidance is within that piece. But at your district, maybe you want to think about having kind of like a point person or something, so that not every single one of you is sending an email to the publishing company asking for permission.
So Daniel's in the room right now. Maybe that's something Daniel can talk to Liz about, because I can't, that's an overwhelming task, I'm thinking, for even a grade level in a building to do. So maybe that's something that the district could help us with.
I'll talk to Liz when we're both finished with the sessions. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Daniel.
You bet.
Yeah, I know. It's such like a icky, sticky thing. So at Collaborative Classroom, like we can't just say like, yep, go ahead and record the lessons. They're not our books. So, legally, we, can't allow that. So we have to have that in our guidance document. Go ahead.
We are required to record every Zoom that we're doing with our class. And in some of those Zooms, we might be showing parts of the book. We might be doing an interactive read aloud with them. So once the district gets the okay from all the publishers, then we're good to do that and post those recordings.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You just need permission to be able to record. Yeah. And so that guidance is right there, and you read it in the remote, right in the introduction. Okay. Just catching back up on the chat. Jennifer mentioned that private means you share it with your parents, but we're not like, putting it out to the entire world. Okay. Okay, so I think we're all caught up on the chat. What else did folks want to bring forward from the introduction of the remote learning guidance document? I know you appreciated those scheduling considerations. There's a link. Let's see here. There's a link right there to the copyright holder request form. So we'll talk offline about that and someone will get back to you about that. But what we're going to dig into next is the specific grade level guidance. And so in order to do that, I'm going to go back here, share my screen, and we are going to, I'm just going to share a little bit of information with you and then we'll dig into that grade level piece. And so the essentials of the specific grade level guidance, it's important to know that we made some really unique considerations based on really trying to keep the integrity of the lessons and knowing it's the beginning of the year. There's considerations for reduced instructional time and essential learning. And so we know that we can't necessarily replicate the hours that we have our students in front of us with the hours that we have them with us on a screen. And so we consider what at-home activities will help support the work that we're doing with them synchronously to help them continue to apply and become independent in that work. And so what we're going to do next is take a look at your grade-specific guidance section in that remote learning guidance document. Think about what you're considering for prioritizing for live instruction when you have your students in front of you, and maybe what you're thinking about more for that application piece. And as you're looking through that, just be ready to share 2 different implications or considerations that you found in that guidance document for remote learning. So again, you can find that document. You just had it open, so right in that shared Google folder. And we'll dig into this work for another 5 minutes or so, and then just be ready to share a couple ideas that you came up with. All right, go ahead and finish reading whatever section or paragraph you were looking at. All right, so I would love to bring forward what you talked about, or not what you talked about, what you read about in your specific grade level guidance. So let's kind of talk through, we'll start with kindergarten because maybe other grade levels will get some ideas as well. So let's hear from some kindergarten folks, either come off of mute or share in the chat. What did you find in terms of what you're thinking about prioritizing? And what considerations you're thinking of making for that live and remote learning? And something you'll have to get really comfortable with teaching remotely is wait time. So okay, so we have digital word wall for second, but thinking about kindergarten, Andrea's thinking about each child's attention span and an ability to stay focused. And so thinking about different ways that we can do that, we want to think about, like I said, what we're going to prioritize when we have them with us versus what is something that they can do when they're not with us. And so that remote learning guidance document pulls out a few of those pieces. So specifically thinking about kindergarten, it talks about that first week of instruction, and actually that first unit of instruction being 4 weeks. It talks about teaching that unit as intended for the full 4 weeks on whatever platform that you have. So you can think about utilizing some of those additional open ideas, maybe for some of that asynchronous work. And then it talks about unit 2 in that consideration of a digital word wall. And I know there was a conversation going on in the chat box about different word wall pieces. I like Andrea's idea too, maybe even an individual word wall. So pictures with words, especially for our ELL kids. I know some teachers have had success with Jamboard as a digital word wall. Tammy mentioned how they can share their writing through uploading pictures in Seesaw, and kindergartners can do that. We have to teach and model and practice it, but they can do that. And there was a question too, why are there only 2 units included in this guidance? So this is beginning of the year remote learning guidance, the middle of the year is in development, and then we'll be rolling out the end of the year. But we needed to get this out because school was starting. And so we wanted to have it in the hands of people who needed it. So there will be more guidance coming as we move throughout this school year, but hopefully everybody can get back into buildings before we need it. But if not, there will be guidance provided. Anything else from kindergarten in terms of what you're considering prioritizing? The guidance recommends that you teach those lessons as you would. You can have your students writing right in front of you. You can play around with their camera angles to be able to see what students are writing as well. And so I'm not sure what devices your students will be utilizing, but playing with that camera angle is a way that you can see their writing. It's gonna look to you just like it would look as if you were sitting across the table from them. And so we're really just trying to replicate that. And you can have little one-on-one conversations with students as well. As a host of a Zoom, you can mute students. You can have them turn cameras off. You can turn cameras on. You have lots of options to kind of play around with when you're thinking about teaching these lessons remotely as well. Okay, you have iPads. So they don't necessarily have a movable camera, but they could certainly prop it up so that you could see their writing, or you could do a quick check-in by having them hold up that writing as well. Jennifer is asking about not being allowed to mute students anymore. And so I'm not sure if that's like a district thing or a host thing, a Zoom setting. So we'll get some more guidance for you on that, Jennifer. All right, what did first grade read about in terms of the remote learning guidance?
I'll share one thing that I saw that I know that I'm going to want to use some of my live teaching time, especially since at the beginning when my parents will most likely be on those live sessions with their kiddos, using like phonetic spelling. So that's something we do all the time in here, but I think parents are going to get caught up in you have to spell those words correctly. So making sure that they know that that's not developmentally appropriate.
Exactly, absolutely. Thank you, Cindy. What are other first grade teachers thinking as you're looking at this and thinking about prioritizing?
Writing about reading. I like that. I used to do a unit about writing about your reading. So I really like that and adding that in as a home activity.
Yeah, I like that idea as well. And so that idea of considering what do I need to do when I have my students with me on a Zoom, and what's something that they can do and be guided in when they're not. So the instructional guidance for grade 1 in the remote learning talks about unit 1 and some different considerations, as well as teaching that first unit in its entirety as it's intended for those 5 weeks. It also offers some suggestions for establishing a weekly time to confer with writers individually. And so when you're thinking about that idea, logistically, maybe you have office hours where students pop in during a set amount of time. Maybe you have a set appointment with a student during a set amount of time. Maybe you have writers in breakout rooms and you pop in and talk to them individually. So I'm not sure kind of what Grandview has set up for the rules of how those breakout rooms are working and things like that. But those are some different considerations for how you can have that one-on-one time with your writers. Maybe you even want to schedule it so you have 3 writers a day that you confer with. And so on Monday, you're going to have an appointment with these 3. Maybe they stay on after your writing lesson and everyone signs off. And then Tuesday, these 3 writers stay on after their lesson. So you even literally just say, like, Johnny, Bobby, Susie, you stay on the meeting. Everyone else, you're dismissed, however it ends up working. And then they kind of know their day that they meet with you. So that's another thing that I found that has worked to kind of have that one-on-one connection with the writing. But I see these lessons and that guidance, we teach them as intended. So we would do our read aloud just as we would during that time, or maybe that's something, if that's a recording that you want to send out, record yourself doing that read aloud if you don't have, when you're thinking about kind of what your day looks like, and if you don't have that time to do that synchronously, you want to be able to have those conversations and opportunities. But my best advice would be to be able to teach those lessons live as intended, just through a virtual platform. You see all of your students in front of you. You can call upon them as needed. They can go into breakout rooms and turn and talk to partners. They can talk to someone at home. They can talk to a stuffed animal. It could be like their thought partner or their talking buddy. And then they can engage in their writing. And like I said, they can prop up their iPad so that you can see what it is that they're writing, or they can hold up what it is that they're writing. Utilize those breakout rooms in order to see individual students, meet with individual students, and then you can come back together as a whole to do some sharing. And so I think that you can really replicate that being a writer instruction in a virtual format pretty nicely, pretty much as intended. And then it just gives some guidance for different activities for extension in terms of that at-home work. What about grade 2?
Appreciate how you just mentioned that their partner can be like a stuffed animal or somebody at home, so that they can still be on mute, but sharing, because my concern with second grade, as maybe I know some people in our breakout room said, is that, putting the second graders in a breakout room, at least right out of the gate, is a little scary.
It is scary to think about. And so we just want to be, cognizant of our students, social emotional health as well when we're thinking about engaging them in this work. What did others notice about the second grade? There were a lot of similarities to kind of what we talked about in first grade. It does talk about, for example, in unit 2, if you need to modify that unit for time, you can omit week 3. It also talks about using particular extensions to guide conversations as you're conferring with students. And again, there's those at-home activity ideas as well. And so my hope for you all, after our time together today, and we still have some time that we're going to engage in some preparing and planning work on the Learning Portal, is that you have an understanding of being a writer, what its goals are. You saw that sample snippet lesson. You saw what a week of instruction looks like. You've taken a tour of the Learning Portal. You know where all the resources are. And now you've thought about what that can look like when you're teaching it remotely. So what we're going to do next is spend some time in breakout rooms, just kind of processing this and thinking about preparing to teach remotely. And so what you're going to do is in the breakout rooms, you are just going to kind of have a smaller amount of people with you to just really start to explore your program materials. And so we do have a few folks here who are still not up and running on the Learning Portal. And so you can stick right here with me and not go into the breakout room. And I'll try to continue to problem solve with you. I've given you a few tips and some guidance in the chat. But for everyone who does have portal access, you're going to go ahead and go onto the learning portal and just do some exploration. So take a look at the resources tab, explore the remote learning guidance resources like you did, and then just think about, how is this going to support your instruction? Kind of talk through what those lessons are going to look like. So we're going to take about 10 minutes to engage in this work. So I'm going to open up those breakout rooms. And again, if you don't have portal access, just don't join the breakout room. And I'll try to help you problem solve. I think there's just a few people who still need to get that access. And then if you have other specific questions, you can also kind of hold before you join your breakout room, and you can have some conversation with me before you join. Any questions before we go into this next portion of our time together? All right. So with that said, if you don't have portal access, just stick right here. You can click join later. And otherwise, enjoy this exploration activity in your breakout rooms.
Liz.
I'm on mute, sorry, yes.
Okay. I'm one of those people.
Okay.
During the summer, I logged in and I got in using, by accident, my personal email account. So I tried to make one with the district email, and that's when, I got to the point where it said it would send me the login info, and it never came. So I don't know if they typed it in wrong, or so I sent an email to what you said, the support at collaborativeclassroom.org.
Okay.
But I tried to get in cclearningportal.org. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
cclearningportal.org.
CCC.
Oh, 3?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I would just try that just to see if I.
Sometimes, Julie, the activation email goes to like the junk or the spam folder. Actually, oftentimes it does.
Okay.
So that would be one other thing to check.
Okay.
In the meantime.
I'll check that here.
But they'll get you all sorted out. The support people will, they're amazing. I can only do a little bit of initial problem solving, but typically what I do is direct people to them.
Okay, let me see if it's in.
Liz.
Yes.
In order to take this course with you, we had to do the sign up thing that you just sent.
Okay.
So, should I, like Julie, be looking in spam or something for it? Because I should have it, and I don't know.
All right, the rest of the rooms will close in about 20 seconds, and we'll do some final reflection and wrapping up. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had an opportunity to explore the resources on the Learning Portal. I was able to help most people problem solve their Learning Portal issues. If there were any other issues that you were having with your Learning Portal, support at collaborativeclassroom.org will always help you. They're pretty responsive. But with that said, I just want you to kind of process and kind of recap where we've been today. One thing I do want to mention is that much of the work with being a writer and the development of our writers happens during those writing conferences. And I know that I mentioned them. I'm sorry, my daughter just lost her tooth and brought it up to show me. Much of the work in developing a writer is in terms of those writing conferences. And so we talked a little bit about assessment, but we didn't dig deeply into the conferences. The conference notes are incorporated in your assessment resource book, and they will be called for in your lesson materials. And so there's a conference form. You probably saw it. You probably flipped through it. It's unit specific. And so again, just like everything else, the procedure for a conference, how you conduct the conference, how you analyze the conference is included, as well as some considerations for supporting students who are struggling. And so when you're looking through that assessment resource book, again, it will be called for in your program materials. It'll tell you right where to go, right where to find it. You'll be provided some ideas and opportunities to support the students who are struggling in those writing conferences as well. And so with that said, let me just swing back to my slide deck here as we wrap up our time together today and thinking about just doing some final reflections about the implications and the considerations for being a writer in terms of that virtual format and making some decisions. So I would love just to kind of hear your final thoughts by sharing those in the chat box. Any final reflections, next steps, any support that you think you might continue to need. I know we need to have a little bit of a conversation about that copyright piece. But if there's anything else that you're feeling like you need support on, it would be helpful if you shared that in the chat, and any other takeaways. I really appreciated my time with you today. It was wonderful to be working with the K2 team. I really appreciate your engagement. I know this is super stressful. Not only are we learning a new curriculum, but we're learning how to teach in a way that we've never really taught before. And so it's scary, but just know that doing it this way is better than not doing it at all. And your students don't know any different. And so this is the world that they've come to know. And so I know you're going to find success with the program materials, especially because they're super supportive. So with that said, again, thank you so much for your time. I'll be on for another minute or so if you need anything. Ellen are you raising your hand?
Yes.
No, you're on mute, babe.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm not.
No, you're fine.
When I went on to my name, it didn't take me to anything about licenses.
Okay, so stick on for a second, Ellen, and I'll walk through that with you, okay?
Thanks.
All right, bye everyone. Thank you so much. It was great to be able to problem solve with people. Some friends are excited to have that writing program with those mentor texts. You're very welcome. Thank you so much.
We were both like,